Ever get this feeling like we're all in on some kind of cosmic joke? Like, reality's got this whole rule book, but nobody told us where to find it.
Or maybe less of a rule book and more like we're all kind of hypnotized, stuck with this assumption, this like taboo that shapes everything.
Right. And that's kind of the adventure we're on today, a deep dive into that taboo with Alan Watts and his book On the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. But Watts, he wasn't just some philosopher, you know.
Oh yeah, no, this wasn't some ivory tower stuff.
Theology, divinity, those were his degrees. But then Zen Buddhism, that's where he really made his mark.
Bridging worlds, right.
And that's what led him to this radical idea, this idea that the you think you are, that feeling of being this separate self, might be the biggest illusion of all.
Whoa, okay, I can hear some of you listening right now like, hold up, that's me in here. What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
And Watts gets that. He even compares it to like a hypnotic hoax we've all fallen for since we were kids. It's wild how it gets baked into our language, too. We say things like, I came into this world as if we were like chilling out somewhere before we showed up.
Sorry, universe. Late arrival. My bad.
Exactly.
But this whole separate ego thing, that's not just some abstract idea. That has consequences, big ones.
Oh, absolutely. It sets us up for this constant struggle. Like we're at odds with the universe itself, always trying to conquer, to control, instead of just connecting and going with the flow.
Man, it's exhausting just thinking about it.
Right.
And Watts has this analogy I love. He talks about the mind being like an inner officer.
Oh, yeah.
This voice that's constantly narrating everything, analyzing, judging, always keeping us at arm's length from experience.
It's like we're watching our lives through a window instead of actually living them. And because we feel separate, we create a reality where we have to constantly defend that separation, which just leads to more conflict, more suffering.
So it's not about pretending we don't each experience the world in our own unique way, right? It's about questioning what that I really is.
Exactly. And that's where things get really, really interesting.
So how do we even start to see past this illusion, this idea of the separate self? Thankfully, Watts gives us a few clues, and this is where I think he gets really fascinating. He points out that we humans, we're always trying to impose order, like a grid, on top of something that's constantly moving and changing. He calls it the wiggle, right?
And what's so cool is that he's not just talking about some abstract idea here. He's talking about the core of reality itself. It's like, you can't step in the same river twice. Right? Everything's in flux. Us too.
He's got this analogy I love about trying to catch the wind in a net.
Oh, yeah. I like that one.
We use language, categories, even scientific methods to make sense of this wiggle, this flow of experience, but they're just tools, you know?
It's like trying to bottle up a cloud.
Exactly.
Or think about how we try to explain what an ant does. We break it down into all these separate actions. But even then, you can see that what the ant's doing, it's totally bound up with its environment.
Yes. It's like when you're lost in something, like listening to music you love or playing a sport. That feeling when the you trying to manage everything just fades away.
There you go. That's a glimpse of it.
Yeah.
That interconnected reality where everything's always moving and shifting.
But we get so stuck in our heads, right? Trapped in that illusion of being separate. It's like we're watching the dance instead of actually dancing.
Instead of just feeling the music, we're busy analyzing the steps, critiquing the rhythm.
Yeah.
And missing out on all the fun.
Okay, so if we're not these separate egos, these little me's running the show, then what are we? This is where Watts really blows my mind. He starts talking about the true self, this IT.
And this is where it gets really tricky, right?
Yeah.
Because he's not giving us another label to grab onto.
Right.
He's using IT on purpose, you know, because it points to something way bigger than our usual ways of thinking.
It's like, how do you explain the feeling of looking at the Milky Way? Words just kind of fall apart.
Exactly. Like we're trying to scoop up the ocean using a teacup. So how do we even start to wrap our heads around this IT thing?
Right. How do we even begin to?
Yeah. Well, think about it like this. Remember that feeling of being totally lost in something you love, where that separate self just kind of melts away?
Yeah.
Watts would say that's a taste of it. Tapping into something much, much bigger than ourselves. He talks about this IT is like a massive interconnected web. And we're all like little pulses of energy within it.
Okay, so it's not about like becoming one blob of universal consciousness, right? That we don't lose our individuality.
Not at all. It's about recognizing the connection that was always there under the surface of things.
Like the wave and the ocean, they're not two separate things.
Exactly. The wave is the ocean, just doing its wave thing.
So if we're already part of this IT, this like interconnected everything, what does that even mean for how we live? Do we all need to go find a cave and meditate for the next 50 years?
Well, luckily, Watts reminds us you are IT.
Mm,
You don't have to try and become something you already are.
that's comforting.
Right. It's not about reaching some perfect state of enlightenment. It's about seeing through the illusion of separation, living with your eyes open.
And maybe that changes how we see everything.
Well,
Even the stuff we thought was bad or wrong or different, it's all part of this like cosmic dance.
exactly.
Kind of makes you want to laugh, like
Yeah.
that old saying, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
Right.
So this shift in perspective, it doesn't mean life suddenly becomes a breeze, but maybe we can approach it all with a little more lightness,
Yeah.
a little more humor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because when you start to see how connected everything is, even conflict takes on a different flavor.
Yeah.
It's like every game needs players, even the ones we see as opponents at first.
So next time you feel that pull, that feeling of being alone or separate or like you're banging your head against the wall, remember that might just be the ego trick doing its thing, the truth.
Mm.
It might be way more wonderful and way funnier than we usually give it credit for.
And that, I think, is the real invitation here. To approach life with a sense of curiosity, a little playfulness, to really see the world with fresh eyes, and to remember we're all in this together, whatever this turns out to be.